We are here. It is the second day of June. It's election day here in Ontario. Finally. Yeah. We have put the campaign in the rearview mirror. Now it's up to everybody to get out there and cast a ballot, if you haven't done so already. But you know what? I think that's going to be the story. Quite frankly, today is going to be voter turnout. So here we are, Dave Trafford with you. It's the Writ Race, the daily edition of On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics podcast for Story Studio Network. And joined this morning by Keith Leslie, who is getting all set to provide analysis and coverage at CH Television in Hamilton this evening. And Bob Reid from Broadway Strategy, and he is the principal there and knows a thing or two about election days. Welcome both. Bob, I think, the question I have for you, and I know you've kind of lived through a number of campaigns, certainly at the provincial level and advised on other campaigns. What's today like for the leaders?
It's a grand relief. It's really what it is, because as you said, it's finally here. It's over. All the hard work, all the heavy lifting is behind them. There's literally nothing they can do today. They can't campaign. All they can do is go and get the ballot box photo op, cast their ballot, give a comment, and then go home and wait. But it's a tremendously relieving day when you do finally get here. Now, it's a nail biter, of course, for those who are waiting to see how the results might determine their futures going forward. But
yeah, so I was going to ask you, as a staffer, I mean, was the next order of business, no matter win or lose, was a manicure? Was that pretty much what you had to do?
There's a degree of that, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, Keith, I know a lot has been made of how, this has been the peekaboo campaign, although, you can say what you will. The Tories have run pretty much a flawless campaign. I noted yesterday in the Star when they were talking about, trying to fact check Doug Ford. They couldn't fact check him because he had uncheckable statements, and so few of them, that between Wednesday of last week and Sunday on the weekend, he only spoke in public for 25 minutes. I compared him to our friend Mark Toohey at News Talk 1010, who's doing 4 hours a day on the election. I mean, holy cow. But you know what? This has worked. We will talk as much as we want between now and tomorrow when we look at the results, or what resembles results. But I think this is kind of one for the books, no?
Well, yeah. First of all, he broke the Star's fact checker, which is kind of funny. But yes, this was a campaign, and as much as we in the media criticized it nonstop, beginning to end, for the limited availabilities, the fact he wouldn't take questions, he didn't even tell us where he was going half the time. He was gone 2-3 days without being seen, which we've never seen in an election campaign. Even if you are the leader, you protect your lead, but you're still out there to some degree. This was unprecedented in how they were never out there for 2-3 days at a time, and I say, when they didn't jump on the storm, head off to Ottawa like Del Duca did right away. He went to Uxbridge, but he, again, low-key, didn't invite the cameras. One showed up, he didn't like that. I mean, they ran, from their point of view, a classic, keep him in the bubble and don't let him, get in his own way. Don't let him say anything that could cause him any grief. And therefore, they just had these rallies where he'd come out and he'd speak for 6 or 7 minutes and get off the stage. It was a classic campaign, though. As we see from the polls, it worked. I mean, not only are they looking at re-election for sure, they may even be looking at a bigger majority than they had last time. I still have hope that the polls are wrong. We've seen the polls be wrong before, and that we're at least looking at a minority government situation here. But that may be just hope on my part. It seems that this campaign, we call it peekaboo or bubble boy or whatever you want to call it, as a conservative strategy has absolutely worked. He hasn't put his foot in his mouth. He hasn't gotten angry. He's thin-skinned on some things, especially his defense of the government's pandemic record. And the opposition parties failed to get under his skin. They failed to combine, their efforts against him. They went at each other as much as they went at Ford. And I think in the end, that has helped his campaign as well. So from the conservative strategist point of view, and Mr. Reid obviously was one of these, I think this is a big win and a classically positive campaign for them, even though as a journalist and as perhaps as a voter, I thought it was horrible.
So, I mean, to that point then, Bob, is this is great politics, clearly, but is it really good in the long run for, what we hope to see good governance in the next 4 years?
Nobody cares about this stuff outside of the media.
I'm so glad you said that, because if John Wright were here, that's what he would have said.
It's entirely true. None of this, everything, all the egregious list of sins that Keith just laid out, none of this has traction with people out there. They don't care that Doug Ford doesn't answer a lot of questions. They don't care that there's been limited access to the media. They really don't. They want to know, who is this guy? What's he all about? What do I get if I get four more years of him? Or what do I get if it's the other guys? That's what matters. So this really is a lot of inside baseball. And hey, I'm a former journalist as well myself, so I understand how irksome it is from a media standpoint. But from a front runner campaign standpoint, it's all about minimizing risk. How do we minimize the potential for something to go sideways and create an issue that wasn't there yesterday and that we don't want created because of a slip of the lip or an inadvertent comment or an unprepared response? It's all about minimizing risk, and that's what they've done very highly successfully with Doug Ford. They've kept him out of trouble. He's been on the straight and narrow when it comes to his messaging, and he has done a couple of interviews, and if you listen to them, he's been remarkably consistent. He hasn't been thrown off his game at all, so he's actually done a good job. But the overall strategy of keep him on a short leash has worked highly effectively.
So let me ask you this, because as I was watching sort of this unfold, and I've said this a couple times over the course of the campaign, this has really been for me a reset election for all four parties. Certainly for the Conservatives, because I think this has been a reset for Doug Ford. 4 years ago, we never would have pictured this character of Doug Ford going into a campaign. We never would have anticipated that, bubble boy or not, that he was as likable as he is. And let's face it, to Keith's point, the chances are pretty good they're going to increase the number of seats they get at Queen's Park, and that's only because, well, more people are going to vote for Doug. And I've heard a number of people say COVID actually helped him do that. It steeled him in terms of his leadership. He saw what the challenges of being in the hot seat are. And, politics aside, like it or not, we're in a pretty good place generally where we were, say, 2 years ago. And his spending has actually, changed the definition of what it means to be a conservative in this province right now. So, you know what? I think if he wins going away here, Bob, he might be you could probably look down the road and say it's not unlikely he'd be a 3-term premier.
Well, that is a long way down the road, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. And you're entirely right. 4 years ago, the Doug Ford that was running 4 years ago is not the Doug Ford that's running for re-election. Now, anyone who serves a term as premier is going to be changed by that experience. They're going to have learned some lessons. They're going to have made some course corrections. But it really is a fundamental change with Doug Ford. He is very different from the sort of sloganeering bull in a china shop that we saw 4 years ago into a more even-keeled, more even-tempered leader. And I think that is largely due to the COVID experience. And we've talked about this before, how crises make or break leaders. And in Doug Ford's case, it made him into a leader. It took a guy who was rough around the edges, who was unpredictable, who didn't play well in the sandbox with others necessarily, into somebody who learned to put the proverbial water in his wine and keep the focus on where it needs to be and figure out, okay, how do we get stuff done that really needs to be done quickly? Who do I have to hold hands with, even if I'm holding my nose with my other hand, to make this work and to deliver what needs to be delivered for the people. So it is a different character, a different Doug Ford, and as noted, yeah, they kept the Teflon around him just to make sure that nothing pierced that.
So Keith, what's the balance there? Because clearly his own personal experience, and say what you will. I remember one morning I was on doing the radio show, and the premier called in just to sort of clarify or help us with a topic issue that we were talking about vis-a-vis COVID-19. He was out doing his Tim Hortons run and called the radio show. So there's that likability about him, despite the whatever you think in terms of politics. So he learned clearly sitting in that hot seat. But how much of that was the first personal experience as the premier of the province, and on the other hand, the war room preparing for this, because they have done a remarkable job. I think I mentioned to you last week I was at a live event at the Toronto Region Board of Trade, and it was the Curse of Politics podcast was what they were doing it live in the room. And the most remarkable thing about it, I love the show, by the way, but the most remarkable thing is that the brain trust of the Ford campaign war room was sitting in the front row. They were laughing, they were drinking wine, they were having a great time, no pressure there. Clearly, they have had a significant influence on Doug Ford's behavior in this campaign, just aside from the peekaboo part of it. Somehow they have imparted on him, here's how you do this. And it's not unusual for a leader not to listen to advisors. He has done so here.
Oh, yeah, no, he's clearly taking the advice that's being given, and it's clearly some very good advice. But I think we've also learned, Ontarians have learned that Doug Ford is much more of a populist than he is an ideologue. And so when you see him coming out and, spending like a drunken liberal, running deficits longer than the Liberals are proposing, that's quite surprising to people. When you see him coming out with Justin Trudeau, and the two of them, having hammered each other ruthlessly in their election campaigns, coming out and announcing major projects together. It showed that Ford has matured. Bob said, he didn't play well in the sandbox with others. He's absolutely learned how to do that, at least publicly. And, he during the debate when he was getting, all three of the other opposition leaders were piling on him, he turned to Mike Schreiner and said, Mike, I could work with you. I can get along with you. You speak to these other two. I don't understand, but I could work with. He reaches out to people on that human straight across level, and it works. When you see him, we've mentioned about these 8 private sector unions that have come on side to endorse the Fords. When you see him at the rallies with those union workers, it's like, I don't want to say rock star time, but everyone wants a selfie with the premier. They're all out there. They really appreciate what he's doing, and they like him. And that goes a long, long way, especially with, the public sector unions are never going to come on side with the Conservatives. But some of the people, Pat Dillon from the Building Trades Council, who was working coalition that ran the ads against the working families that ran the ads against the Conservatives, Tim Hudak, they beat him up to death with their ads. He's sitting there with Monty McNaughton, the labor minister, with a photo op saying, this is the future. The Trades Council, Monty McNaughton has his emphasis on skilled trades has gone so far to help this government change its appearance, change its relationship with organized labor and with working people. That's what's going to make a huge difference this time. The people that didn't know Doug Ford in 2018 and that were afraid of him are not afraid of him anymore. In fact, they like him. So I think a lot of people that voted for Justin Trudeau last fall are going to vote for Doug Ford this time, simply because, he's grabbed that middle of the road, that moderate spot, and that's what's working. It always does in Ontario.
So, Bob, I know you got a hard stop here. So before we go, I just want to get your sense in terms of the effect and the impact of this campaign on the Conservative movement right across the country. I know a couple of weeks ago, you and Bob Richardson were on the show and we were talking about sort of the fallout in Alberta. But we watched the guns sort of pointed inwards in the leadership campaign federally for the Conservatives. What I'm thinking that they need to be taking the page out of this Ford Nation playbook.
I expect they will. If they've got any smarts at all, they will look at this and not just this campaign, but this approach to governing that we've been talking about building bridges and about being prepared to do things that might be anathema on a purely ideological level, but which ultimately provide good government, and good government ultimately provides good politics as well. And so any anybody in the conservative movement should be paying attention and reminding themselves, hey, look at Ford, look at Ontario, look at the success that he not only had 4 years ago, but he, assuming the polls go the way we all say they will, that he's actually built on, that he's solidified that. Because the debate that rages among conservatives is, what do we run on? How do we run to win? And there's been this ongoing split that's been exacerbated lately between those who say we have to be hardcore true blue conservatives because that's what gets us elected when we win, or others saying, no, we need to take a more moderate view. We need to break out of old molds and old boxes. Again, Ford has shown how it's done. They should very much take a page.
Yeah, and I think that the issue there, as you define it, is being, as Keith says, the populist, running as a populist, or on principle. And that's where, the conservatives always stumble. Listen, we'll leave it at that. I know you guys will be busy today, offering analysis, etc., and we'll gather the roundtable again tomorrow and sift through the entrails just to see exactly how all of this plays out. Bob Reid, Keith Leslie, I'm Dave Trafford. It is the Writ Race, the daily edition of On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics Podcast. We'll talk to you tomorrow in the aftermath.